All right, I'll start that again, this time with sound. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this third edition of StoryFutures Presents, the Future of Storytelling series by StoryFutures. I'm Asta Amundsen, your host for these talks, and my background is as a maker of interactive theatre, immersive festival environments, and as a developer of narrative and interaction tools for live performance through my company, Computer-Aided Theatre. I'm now also a doctoral researcher with StoryFutures, exploring personalization of live interactive audience experiences. StoryFutures is led by Royal Holloway, University of London, and is part of the Arts and Humanities Research Council's Creative Industries Clusters programme. We represent specifically the Gateway Cluster and Greater London area, and we're concerned with delivering game-changing R&D projects by sharing cutting-edge research with creative SMEs. Placing innovative storytelling and experience design at the heart of next-generation immersive technologies, we exist to fuel growth and innovation across story forms, business models, data management, processes, and audience experience. StoryFutures Presents is linked to the Storyform part of this remit and is a platform for showcasing novel and timely perspectives from makers as well as researchers across the expanded immersive field. This will include many expressions of expanded realities, as well as immersive theatre and embodied live practices, interactive digital narrative, as well as platform and tech-agnostic experience design approaches. We invite the storytellers who speak to us to share how their work is being shaped by current funding and production realities. And we also aim to contextualize new and emergent forms that we discuss within a media arts and digital performance history context. So, William Gibson recently talks of the increasingly daunting task of conceiving of any realistically detailed futures against the escalating strangeness of the world we are living through, and a phenomenon that he refers to as the fuckedness quotient. Gibson, like Shell's pioneering scenario planner Pierre Wack before him, suggests the ability to conceive of a future proceeds directly from a deep engagement with and reimagining of the present. And it's in that spirit that we hope that exploring the breadth of contemporary storytelling together through Story Presents forms from this particular moment in time may offer some vantage points that can illuminate some of our possible story futures. The subject of today's talk, QAnon, is an example of a particularly fascinating and troubling story present, and its particular, often surprising, and at the moment quite considerable impacts on the world is something that's there for us to watch unfold in real time. Our speaker today is Adrian Hon. Adrian is co-founder and CEO of Six to Start, creators of game-like stories and story-like games, including the fantastically successful Zombies Run, the world's best-selling smartphone fitness game, with 10 million players worldwide. So with numbers like that, the chances are good that quite a few of you in the audience has sampled at least this particular experience. He is also the author of A History of the Future in 100 Object, and has spoken at TED, the Long Now Foundation, Google X, as well as Disney Imagineering. Before becoming a game designer, Adrian was also a neuroscientist and experimental psychologist at Cambridge, UCSD, and at Oxford. The talk today will run for about 30 minutes, after which there'll be a question and answers. And for that part, we'll be joined by Alfie Bown of Royal Holloway Media Arts. Alfie is also a journalist and author of The PlayStation Dream World, as well as co-editor of Post Memes, Seizing the Memes of Production. You are all very much encouraged to join this conversation as well. Please say hi and contribute any questions that you might have via the YouTube chat window. As we finish up the talk, I will collect those questions and feed them to Adrian and Alfie after the talk. A recording of the talk will also be available on this page sometime afterwards, and you'll be able to access it there along with any of our previous talks as well. Don't forget as well to sign up for StoryFutures newsletters for all sorts of exciting announcements and opportunities. You can do so by visiting storyfutures.com, and please also follow us on Twitter at StoryFutures. So yeah, say hi via the chat and give this talk a thumbs up if you like it, and subscribe to the channel to stay tuned for the next one of these talks. It's now my great pleasure to hand you over to Adrian Hon for what alternate reality games can teach us about QAnon.
Hi, thank you for that introduction, Ashley. That's wonderful, and I'm really happy to be here. Just to start out, if you read my essay about what ARGs can teach us about QAnon, which came out fairly recently, then you will hear some familiar things at the start of this talk. But I promise I'll get on to some new ideas later on. So I'm not an expert in QAnon. I wouldn't claim to be. I'm more of a very interested observer. If you don't know what QAnon is, it's a far-right conspiracy theory that alleges a cabal of Satan-worshipping pedophiles is running a global sex child trafficking ring and plotting against Donald Trump. So sounds a bit unusual. It started in the US about 3 years ago, and it's only grown since. It has millions, tens of millions of people probably who would who follow it very closely, and it's really grown in the last year or so, particularly in the UK and the rest of Europe, fueled in part from conspiracies about COVID-19. And I've been interested in QAnon for a while, since, unlike a lot of other conspiracy theories, it seemed to be extremely online. We've always had conspiracy theories that they're not new at all. There are many things in QAnon that are not at all new. But what really jumped out to me was that QAnon really was born from the internet. And one thing that I saw in a lot of the coverage about QAnon was that a lot of people, almost everyone who had become an adherent of QAnon, said that I've done my research. I believe in QAnon because I've done my research. And if you did your research, then you would also too believe in QAnon. And that really struck me, because I thought, what do you mean by doing research? It's obviously not research in the sense that we would understand academic research or scientific research, where you would read a wide sample of the literature, you would critique it, you would try and investigate it. I think what it was obvious that people were doing, or what people meant when they said that they'd done their research on QAnon, is that they typed in QAnon to Google and watched some videos. And if that sounds, if it sounds like I'm putting people down, I don't mean that. But it's research in the same way that someone might research a movie to watch, or someone might research, a washing machine. You would type in a name and you go and read whatever people have read about it. And it really jumped out to me because it reminded me of alternate reality games. And just to sort of take you back to 2001, to what I would consider the first alternate reality game, it's really started here. It started with the marketing for Steven Spielberg's movie AI, or Artificial Intelligence. And if you were paying really close attention to the movie, then you would have noticed on the poster and in trailers, there was a really unusual credit for someone called a sentient machine therapist, someone called Janine Saller, and that's like alongside the director and the casting and the composer. There's a sentient machine therapist, which is really odd. It's obviously not a real not a real sort of job in the movie industry. And if you Googled the name Janine Saller, then you would find her weblog from the year, I think, 2142. And her weblog, obviously fictional weblog, linked to dozens of other fictional websites, like police websites and lifestyle magazines and online stores and hacked blogs in lots of different languages, not just English. And it was this whole alternate reality, hence the term alternate reality game, set within the future of the movie AI. And it was a marketing campaign, fundamentally. It was made by Microsoft, and the game was codenamed The Beast because it was so big. And that name, Janine Saller, was basically what we call a rabbit hole. So in later alternate reality games, we would design rabbit holes so that people would see something really interesting, like the name Janine Saller, and they would type it into Google, and they would find interesting things. And so that was a connection for me, where I thought, oh, when people talk about like they've done their research on QAnon, they've fallen down this online rabbit hole and found this whole alternate reality of videos about how there is this global cabal against Donald Trump and all these people putting it together. So going back to 2001, if you went to Janine Saller's blog and you looked through all these different websites, you would find puzzles and codes and hidden meanings and phone numbers and email addresses. This was not just a game that took place online. It was a game that sort of invaded reality. You could, in fact, meet actors from the game in the real world. You would get phone calls. You would get packages in the mail. It was pretty immersive. And it sounds like a lot of fun, the way I'm describing it here. Who wouldn't want to take part in that story? But in reality, it's kind of a very different kind of fun than watching TV, where you can lean back and you're going to let the story wash over you and just really enjoy, and you don't really have to invest too much. The kind of fun it was more like painstaking research fun. You're having to keep track of dozens of websites, all updating in real time, solving these very hard puzzles, which no single person would possibly have the skills to solve on their own. People needed to work together. And so it was really interesting because this kind of purposeful yet really bewildering complexity of The Beast and of later alternate reality games, it's really the complete opposite of what many people associate with popular entertainment these days, like a Marvel movie or a video game, where every bump in your road to enjoyment has been smoothed away in the pursuit of instant engagement and maximal profit. And what alternate reality games harken back to is a different kind of entertainment that appeals to different people at different times, one that rewards active discovery and drawing connections between clues and sort of giving you this really delicious sensation of a hunch that pays off after hours or even days of work. And so this is not new. We've had this with puzzle books, with murder mysteries, with adventure games, escape rooms, even kind of scientific research. They all hit the same spot. And what was new, though, with The Beast and with alternate reality games that followed it was really less the specific puzzles or the stories that they incorporated, or even the fact that it was online, but actually the scale of the world it created and how fast moving it was, so that no individual could really hope to comprehend what was going on. Instead, people were forced to cooperate, and they had to share discoveries and solutions and exchange ideas and creating resources for everyone to follow. It was not a competitive space. I mean, you wanted to solve a puzzle and it was fun to be the person who solved that puzzle, but you had to work together. And I got involved in this because I was at university at the time. I was meant to be studying for my degree at Cambridge, but instead I wrote a novel-length walkthrough of the beast at the time. So QAnon is not an ARG. It's a dangerous conspiracy theory, and there are lots of ways of understanding QAnon and conspiracy theories without ARGs. But QAnon pushes the same buttons that ARGs do, whether by intention or coincidence. And in both cases, do your research leads curious onlookers to just this vast cornucopia of really exciting information. And so I think for me, that's a kind of central insight here, is that I think QAnon, for people who are involved in it, it's actually fun. It's entertaining. It's really engaging in a way that other entertainment isn't. And so what I want to do is take you through a little bit of my experience in making ARGs later on, and show how that kind of parallels what's going on with QAnon. So after I finished my degree at university, I did not become a neuroscientist or experimental psychologist. I became a game designer because so after I finished, I became a game designer, and I worked on a game called Perplex City. And this was a big alternate reality game that launched in the UK and worldwide, and had a $250,000 treasure. And this was back in 2007. And one of the things I really enjoyed doing with Perplex City when I designed it was creating these story arcs. And the way we would do this is we would create chains of puzzles and websites that would link together. So we would imagine that people would solve one puzzle and then they go to the next website, and that would give them the clue to answer another puzzle, another website. And there's a knack to designing enough parallel strands of investigation so that people didn't feel railroaded down a single path, while not having too much going on that people got confused. And it was, that was something that was kind of really a central part of designing these games. And that's very different from, these kind of now famous QAnon conspiracy theory diagrams, which basically have, you've kind of got Donald Trump here, in the center, and you've got, artificial intelligence, and you've got Hillary Clinton, you've got UFOs, you've got kind of everything you can sort of really imagine, all smashed in together. These conspiracy theory diagrams are trying to make spurious connections between real people and events, whereas my diagram is really a plan from someone who's trying to control what's really going on. So in some ways, this diagram is very different from this diagram, because technically I'm in control here, whereas in this diagram, they're just trying to create connections between things that don't have connections. Except in reality, I wasn't always in control as game designer of Perplex City of what was actually going on with the community, because sometimes we would make mistakes. We would make mistakes in writing the website, so the solution to puzzles would be wrong, or maybe there would be no solution to a puzzle. And in most media, if you're making a TV show and you made a continuity error, or you were playing a game and there was a bug or something was wrong, you would just issue a correction. You just say, hey, we made a mistake. Please just re-download this patch, or please just ignore that continuity error. It doesn't really matter. But ARGs are meant to be real, right? They're meant to mimic reality. It's more fun if we all pretend that an ARG is real. It's part of the kind of collective suspension of disbelief that makes ARGs really fun, and also role-playing games, and also LARPs. It's all more fun if we pretend that this is not a game, and that kind of mantra became so important to ARGs that got turned into the slogan TINAG. And so if there was a problem, if there was a bug, if there was an error we made in Perplex City or in any other alternate reality game, we wouldn't, just issue a correction. We would just fix it with more story. And sometimes what we would do is we would incorporate the community's theories, because what the community would do is they'd say, oh, I can't solve this puzzle, but maybe that's because something else is going on that, maybe we're going to find out from this other character, or maybe, if you look at it in this particular way, I think this event's going to happen. And we'd read that on the player forums because we're all reading what the players are saying. That's the beauty of the internet. We can see what they're saying in real time. And we think, wow, their idea is better than what we planned. We should just throw out our own plans and just take what they would like to see. And so we would incorporate their theories into our game design. And so that's kind of what QAnon does. That's where you have, if you go and look up QAnon's Wikipedia page, you'll see this long list of falsified beliefs of QAnon. 21, I think, statements about QAnon saying that Hillary Clinton is going to get jailed. And of course, that didn't happen. And people keep on expecting, oh, well, this time, when Donald Trump, isn't reelected, then QAnon's all going to fall apart because it's not, because it's been disproven. I'm like, that's not how conspiracy theories work. Certainly not QAnon. If something gets disproven, it just becomes more proof of the conspiracy theory. And if something is wrong in an ARG, it's never really wrong. It's just a theory that hasn't been borne out yet. So there's one thing that I think is kind of really interesting about that, is that these theories are generated through a process of just speculation, or I mean, we would call it bullshitting, really. People just come up with ideas, and there is this kind of stereotype of a conspiracy theorist leading this miserable existence, in a basement somewhere in America, stringing together clippings and photos and, articles on a crazy wall, and just seems like horrible. Why would someone want to do that? But, it's not actually really that horrible. It's actually quite satisfying to be making those connections. I really enjoyed it when I was making my walkthrough for The Beast. This is, part of my walkthrough. It was just a huge amount of work to do, and I actually really enjoyed, putting this together. It kind of felt like a service to the community. And, I think that one of the things that people underestimate in alternate reality games, and also in QAnon, is that they end up being a showcase for special talent that often goes unrecognized elsewhere. Someone commented in response to my article that they met so many wildly talented people with weird knowledge through ARGs. And so let me give you an example. In The Beast, there was a puzzle where you had to understand a piece of music written in lute tablature, so from like medieval music, I guess. And I mean, when does that ever really come into practical use in most people's lives, other than outside an academic context, inside an academic context? Barely ever. But within the context of this ARG, it suddenly became really important that we found someone who understood lute tablature. And similarly, if you believe that the world is governed through a mysterious cabal sharing information through strange messages and codes and symbols, it actually becomes really important that you understand those strange codes and symbols. And that if you have any kind of expertise in that, even the smallest, then you are a valuable individual. And that has a really important thing about people's self-worth. I think QAnon and ARGs make people feel valuable. And that's something that a lot of other entertainment doesn't do. So one of the things that happened during the Beast, the ARG for Steven Spielberg's movie, was that we set up the players set up a Yahoo group called the Cloudmakers. That's what we called ourselves. And there were thousands of people playing in this Yahoo group. And eventually there was too much traffic. There were too many messages being sent every day, and it was just getting overwhelmed. There's no way you could possibly understand what was going on. And most of the traffic or a lot of the traffic was just pure, unfiltered speculation. And it was outweighing, people's information about puzzle solves or things like that. And so the moderators, and I was one of the moderators, set up this new system where every post would have to be tagged. The subject line of every post would have to have some tag, like, website update or puzzle solution or whatever. And one of the most popular tags, and one of the ones that I really enjoyed reading, was SPEC, which is short for speculation. And without moderation, SPEC ends up overwhelming communities because it's far easier and far more fun to bullshit about stuff than to actually do falsifiable research. And we managed to keep it in check in the cloud makers community by firewalling it off from other types of discussion. But without moderation, speculation is repeated enough. If it's finesse enough, it can harden into accepted fact. And that can lead to really, really bad consequences. And I've been kind of touched by this very tangentially just through my own work. One of the puzzles I created in Perfect City, I was involved in Perfect City, was this puzzle called Find Satoshi. And what we did was we shared a photo of this man, and we said, please find this man. That was it. That was a puzzle. And we were kind of testing out this whole idea of 7 degrees of separation, where you can connect one person to another person anywhere in the world through friends of friends. And this man has never been found yet. He's still on the loose. So please don't ask me. Although I get messages all the time asking me, is Satoshi, of the infamous and all too familiar to you billion to one card, that's the puzzle, the creator of Bitcoin? Because a couple of years after we released this puzzle, Bitcoin sprung onto the scene, and it was announced by with a paper by someone calling themselves Satoshi. And so through no particular reason, people assumed that our Satoshi, this man called Satoshi, is the same person as the person who made Bitcoin. And I get these messages all the time. I don't know why. I mean, there's no reason to believe this would happen, but it's kind of annoying. That's harmless. Something that's kind of less harmless came about as part of a TV show I was involved in. And there was this BBC TV show called The Code, which explored the idea of mathematics and nature. And we made an online game and treasure hunt to promote it to younger audiences, because apparently younger people don't enjoy mathematics. And one of those puzzles was about prime numbers, because there's a really interesting phenomenon about how cicadas gestate along some prime number periods. And again, not long after the code came out, there was this strange thing that happened on the internet. A series of very hard puzzles were released by an anonymous group that later called Cicada 3301. You might have heard of them. And there was this whole thing on the internet about trying to find out who was behind Cicada 3301. Was it the CIA? Was it the NSA? Are they trying to contact code breakers? What's going on? And it got to the point where I started getting interviewed about, am I behind Cicada 3301? Because I had, this is a YouTube documentary, Cracking the Code of Cicada 3301. I got interviewed, very popular series. And people thought I was involved because of this connection where I'd made a puzzle that involved cicadas. Sure. And I denied it. But in the comments, people basically say, anyone notice the ARG guy? In other words, me. And his Freudian slip where he says he'd be delighted if someone finds out who he is, Cicada 3301, which clearly proves that I am part of that group. And so does this bother me? Well, the odd thing is that Cicada 3301 is part of this whole QAnon web. So it's kind of strange that through ARGs, people now think that I'm part of some strange shadowy NSA group. And that shows, I mean, this all goes to show that people are kind of drawing these connections between things that really don't need any, it's just pure speculation. But somehow it's gone beyond speculation into, oh, this is just true. Of course it's true, because there's no proof as needed. And because there is no coherent QAnon community in the same way that we had a coherent community for the cloud makers, for the people solving the beast, the AI game, there's no convention of speculation tags. That means that moderation can't be done. Moderation has to be done at the platform level. It has to be done by YouTube and Twitter and Facebook. And they've annotated videos, they've banned accounts and groups, but it's very hard for them to stop the spread of QAnon and dangerous ideas via private chat apps and unmoderated forums. It's kind of really hard to see where that's going to go. So I'm going to sort of finish up with a couple of things. One is that for anyone who's familiar with Baudrillard's simulacra and simulation, all of this will seem like really familiar. He had this concept called hyperreality, and that refers to what happens when a simulation of reality becomes blended with reality itself, where the simulation feels sufficiently realistic that it might be indistinguishable from reality. The crucial thing here is that we aren't necessarily talking about, the Matrix, which also featured Baudrillard, of course. We're not talking about a simulation that is so, which has such good graphics and such good physical fidelity that you cannot distinguish it from reality. It's just the sensation. So if you experience the world through tiny screens, like your phone, and through Facebook and through social media, then if you don't really talk to people in the real world, then it's actually quite easy and quite cheap to make a hyper-real world, because while it would be very difficult for me to put you into a virtual reality and to convince you that you're living in a different parallel universe, it's actually quite easy for me to make a fake website and to make fake Twitter people and to make fake groups on Facebook and to make fake events or to make fake videos. That's quite easy to do. And again, if this is how people are experiencing reality, then we are putting people into a hyper reality where people are sort of confusing what they're seeing online with what is actually happening, even as what is happening online is kind of the real world. So again, an example. In Perplexity, I put my neuroscience background to use by inventing this whole company that was making smart drugs. And that was part of the story. And this company was called Cognivia. And so here's a pretty old website that we made for Cognivia. And we obviously designed it to look like a real pharmaceutical company. But we didn't want to fool people that it was absolutely real. It was just part of the game. Anyway, for a party that we held, we discovered that you could go and get custom M&Ms made. You could print anything you wanted on the M&M. And we wanted to print the name of a drug that Cognivia made called Serotin, which you can see here. So we filled out this form and we said, can we make this custom M&M with Serotin printed on it? And we got an email back saying that, no, you can't do that because Serotin is trademarked by Cognivia. And so this would be trademark infringement. So someone at M&M Googled Serotin and they Googled Cognivia and they mistook our fake website for reality, which is fair enough. I mean, that's I'm not saying that's stupid. That's just like how a lot of people would do it. And so just kind of accidentally, we convinced someone of something that wasn't real. Now, to sort of really wrap up, the I had kind of convinced myself a few years ago, well, ever since I kind of got online, that people would stop falling for fake news, as we call it now, or chain letters or things like that, after they got more used to the internet. They would build up media literacy, and they would understand and be able to distinguish between what was true and false online. And this sort of came about as part of this whole idea of the eternal September. And this is when, back in the days when on the internet, it was quite difficult to get online, it's quite expensive. The way in which most people got online was through university. So every September, when people joined university, you'd have this whole new wave of people joining the internet, and they'd be causing all sorts of fights and flame wars and stuff. And people would say, man, it's September again, that's why our news group is going crazy. And then when AOL came about and CompuServe and the internet got cheaper to join, people called that the eternal September. And I was always very optimistic. I thought, well, it's okay. People will learn, and in a few years' time, they'll understand and they'll stop forwarding me all these stupid chain letters. I don't know, it never happened. People never really built up their media literacy. I was wrong, and my optimism was unfounded. And I think part of that is because it's like saying if you watch enough TV, you'll develop media literacy. Well, it makes a big difference if you only watch Fox News or OAN. You're probably not going to develop any media literacy that way. And if you fall down an attractive rabbit hole into QAnon, then you aren't going to develop media literacy on your own. And if you spend all your time on Facebook or Instagram or Snapchat, on YouTube and Twitter, and in filter bubbles, then you're probably not going to develop media literacy that way either. That only comes about through being curious and exposing yourself to different ideas. And there are in fact efforts to create games, gamification, to inoculate people from fake news. And this is a really interesting project that is trying to do that. And I don't know, I'm kind of really skeptical, because I think the sort of people who need to play this game are never going to choose to play a game that tells them that what they believe is wrong. I don't know why anyone would think that, even though it's very well intentioned. How do we rebuild trust? I think we need to make the reason why people believe in fake news is because they don't believe what institutions are saying, and that's because institutions have lost their trust. So in order to rebuild trust, we need to make institutions more transparent. I think there are some really good examples of that through the COVID tracking project, which is trying to create complete data about COVID. They're exposing all their sources. There's no secrets there. You can even join their Slack and join their data entry processes. There are institutions like Bellingcat that are trying to use citizen journalism effectively to try and understand war crimes and understand pollution. And to the extent I think the gamification can help here, I think it can help by making it easier to rebuild institutions that we can have trust in, and to participate in those same institutions. And that might involve storytelling, and it might involve game design. And if it does, then it shouldn't be the same stuff that passes for gamification these days, like points and badges and levels. Maybe it should use some of the same techniques from ARGs. I'm not sure quite how you do that. I think that's another talk for another time. This is all in progress. I think QAnon took me by surprise. The connection to ARGs was surprising to me. I don't know what's going to happen in the next year, but I think that looking at conspiracy theories, looking at QAnon through the lens of ARGs, through the lens of inherently connected, hyper-real experiences, is something that can really help us understand what's going on, why they appeal to people, and how maybe to combat them. So thank you very much. This went to quite a lot of different places, so I'd be happy to answer people's questions.
Hi, thank you so much, Adrian. That was fantastic, and so many things to pick up on, and and an amazing amount of questions in the chat as well. Yeah, I mean, the thing that really sprung out at me, firstly as well, let me introduce Alfie into the chat as well. Are you there, Alfie? There you are.
Hi, yes, I'm here. Thank you for having me, and thank you for that talk, Adrian. It's really great.
I guess the thing that really jumped out at me, Adrian, is maybe it's partly because this talk to an extent is, you know, happening within the frame somewhat of academia, and this whole thing about I've done my research and the kind of basis for that, and you know, the kind of popularization of research and or whatever gamification of it that is represented by this. I'm sort of wondering whether there's a role there for academia, some kind of epistemological first aid initiative or something like that. No idea. Do you think there's a role for academia anywhere in this?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, no, I think so. And I think that there's only so much that I've been able to look at, in drawing parallels between alternate reality games and QAnon. QAnon is not the only conspiracy theory out there, and the Beast is not the only ARG. There are other things like ARGs, like live action role playing, like, purely online games that I think would be fascinating to look at. And also to sort of look at people's actual interactions and how theories are exchanged. I'm willing to believe that maybe the connection is not as strong as I think. So no, there's plenty of PhDs in this one for sure.
I guess I was kind of thinking more like academic outreach somehow, that perhaps, you were talking about the sort of erosion of trust in institutions that's sort of that we could say some of these things might have sprung from, and maybe whether there's an academic or research component to that as well. I don't know.
Well, I mean, the idea of loss of trust in institutions, I think, is quite an old one, and quite a really worrying one for democracy. And that's something that we're seeing in that people don't believe what their governments tell them. And why is that? I think there's lots of reasons. I mean, governments do, they do cover things up. British government covered things up. So it's kind of weird for me to say to people, oh, you should definitely trust everything that your government should say, because clearly I don't think they've earned that trust. Now, what can academia do about that? I think academia tries to be more transparent. I'm not sure, what it can do to change that tide directly, but it can highlight the dangers for sure.
Yeah.
If I can come in, that'd be great. I've got a few things I wanted to ask about, and I'm sort of thinking about where to start. But I think I love the talk, and I think that what struck me as most thought-provoking for me is that your talk could almost be seen as a kind of alternative history of the online right, because when QAnon kind of bursts onto the scene in the run-up to the Trump election, there is this, as you pointed out, this sort of sense that this is all very new, and QAnon becomes almost this kind of buzzword. Really, it's associated with Pepe and the meme communities and these kind of Chan board cultures that emerged in support of the Trump campaign, and actually that felt very new to liberals. And that's really interesting when you're then talking about, but what your talk is also this kind of prehistory of it. So actually it's almost like saying, well, there's actually there's a prehistory of these things going back to, and I hadn't heard that example of the AI thing, which is basically corporate marketing strategies, transmedia marketing strategies, which basically function the same way. So what seemed like an eruption of subversive energy against corporate capitalism actually has its kind of prehistory in corporate capitalism itself, which I find really interesting sort of history of QAnon, and I wondered what you think about that. I guess I've got another question, but I think I'll stay with this one for now and then come back, because I want to know if you think that that's a fair reading of it, and also whether it shows that actually maybe that could be extrapolated out, and this might sound too broad, but is corporate capitalism to blame for the rise of the far right? Because actually you're seeing the structures originating in these other places.
Well, okay, so I think that ARGs have never been super popular form of entertainment, and it's partly because it's quite difficult to monetize them directly. It's hard to sort of sell people how do you get people to pay to enter an ARG when you're trying to convince people it's not actually real it's actually real in the first place. And so that's why a lot of ARGs have actually ended up being promotional campaigns, like you say. They are promotional campaigns for movies, for games, for TV shows, for cars even. And it's kind of weird and a little bit upsetting that like a sort of art form like that was sort of entirely funded through basically advertising and marketing when there are so many other possibilities. And I would say that it's ARGs also came about around the same time as viral marketing in general. So I don't know that there's a direct connection there, but I think that's definitely something. I mean, I should say that I mean, there is a lot of people who are kind of into media theory and into ARGs would say that The Beast is not the first ARG, that like the Blair Witch Project was there, or some other kind of more obscure ones, but it wasn't, there are, for me, it was a one that really, of course, for me, because it was the first one I played, but also it definitely use the internet in a way that seems quite unique. I think in terms of the far right and capitalism, I don't know. That's we could talk for a while about that one, but I do think that there are some interests that are aligned there, I guess. But I'll sort of leave it at that for a moment.
Yeah, because I was only kind of saying that sort of, I wasn't really expecting you to answer that one, but yeah, no, I think that answer's really good, and it makes me think, because in another way of seeing it, I mean, I guess my experience of like augmented reality gaming and stuff nowadays, like really, I mean, these are the online, they're much more, you can see that connection between QAnon and something like the Blair Witch Project as well. That's there. And what interests me here is how subversive these communities are, and how it seems they are like at heart kind of anti-establishment thing. And this obviously connects to fake news and ideas of distrust in the central discourse and the narrative that's being sold by governments, major media outlets, and so on. And it's quite interesting how augmented reality, I want to ask about where you think augmented reality has gone in a kind of corporate sense as well, because my reintroduction to it was something like Ingress. It's like a 2015 game that's made by Niantic that also make Pokemon Go, and with Pokemon Go, I did some research around that, and it was all looking into how it was basically used by Niantic, which is a subsidiary of Google at the time, to sort of experiment with how they could move people around the city in different ways. So basically, team up with McDonald's and send people here, and then they buy more Big Macs, and then put rare Pokemon in expensive shopping malls in Hong Kong, and then drive traffic there for advertising reasons and so on. So you've got these kind of augmented reality corporation apps, which are basically designed as part of a smart city to drive traffic around the city, move people around in precisely conformist patterns, right? So it's like probably the most kind of conformist thing you could think of, something like Pokemon Go. I mean, I love it, by the way, and play it, but I feel guilty about that. But on the other hand, you've got something like QAnon and these other examples you're giving, which are at heart completely anti-establishment and anti the whole purpose is to dispel the myths of the kind of central discourse and so on. So in some ways it's like augmented, I guess what I'm saying is, has augmented reality gone too far away from its roots in subversive, playful rebellion and become kind of much more like conformism than it used to be, leaving you basically with a choice between Pokemon Go and QAnon, neither of which you want?
Well, I mean, the internet in general, it started from this kind of very hippie-ish sort of ethos, with Stuart Brand and the Whole Earth, catalog, and now it's sort of dominated by 5 companies that comprise 25% of the value of the S&P 500. And so, what is really difficult with augmented reality games like Pokemon is that they cost so much money to make, right? You need to spend I remember talking or hearing a talk by the guys who made Pokemon Go, and it was at a games conference, and everyone in the audience was just like, how do you possibly make money from Ingress, which was the progenitor of Pokemon Go? Like, it's just impossible, it's impossible. Like, no one could figure out how they could possibly do it. And they said, well, we've got a really small team and we make money by telling people to go to Jamba Juice. But, we do everything ourselves. We just, we don't really get any help from the Google Maps team. You know, we just tell them occasionally when we need a feature, and then everyone in the audience laughs because they're like, we can't get Google Maps to give us a time of day. So you're in a situation where these sorts of games, augmented reality games, they require so much investment because you are effectively mapping the world that there's only a few companies that can really do it. You know, Google, Microsoft, the usual suspects, Facebook. And if you're looking at virtual reality now, or heads-up displays, augmented reality glasses, I mean, we all know the companies who are going to make that. It's Samsung, it's Apple. And so kind of necessarily the kinds of experiences and products that you'll have that are able to become popular on augmented reality are ones that are favored by those companies. And usually those are ones that make shitloads of money, honestly. So that's why, and it is interesting that if you look at something like QAnon, it happened on a channel, something like 4chan, which is the lowest of the lo-fi, social media, networks or forums. So it is, it definitely is instructive.
Yeah, no, that's really, really interesting.
Some kind of weird media literacy, of some sort in there still, that there's a suspicion of things maybe that seem more designed or more of an authoritative or kind of corporate taste maybe, whereas some, the chat boards like the Chans kind of in some ways feels more authentic within the sort of vocabulary of these kind of phenomenon maybe.
Yeah, well, there is an aesthetic of authenticity, that I mean, we could go through that. People think, wow, if it's too shiny, if it's too polished, then it's got to be lies, Whereas if it's all done in Comic Sans and it's just done as a GIF, then clearly it's been done by by salt of the earth, meme creators who must be telling the truth, And so I mean, this is what I go back to, which is that, like, if people, why should people believe a really shiny keynote presentation, or a really shiny thing when they can't see the data behind it? And that's why I think it's just so damaging when institutions refuse to share, as in the UK, share the basis upon which they make their information. It is probably the worst thing you could possibly do as a democracy, is to not share that information.
Yeah, I just want to say I totally agree with that, and this actually I think is a provisional answer to this question of whether these kinds of corporate capitalism are to blame for the rise of the right. Like, if you live in a techno-capitalist culture where companies are allowed to have everything hidden, as you say, not make anything visible, so that the everyday person has no access to information, how it's being used, what the truth actually is, of course a symptom of that is going to be conspiracy theories like QAnon. They are the natural symptom of a culture which does that sort of thing. I think that's a really good way of explaining it. I think it's really important.
It's interesting that there's some really meaty questions. So you might have seen my face kind of going, I'm trying to digest the questions that are coming from the YouTube chat here as well. But on the one point that was raised here as well, let me see if I can find it as well, about the sort of, we're talking about the sort of current crop of conspiracies, but also there's sort of historic precursors of this that are being flagged up here as well. So Rena is flagging up the sort of like pre-internet Saint Bartholomew's Day massacre to Guy Fawkes and Elizabethan intrigues. Many are fake, but enough were real. So somehow even pre-internet, we managed to have a sort of a rumor mill that generated enough of this crazy stuff that it was hard for us to employ our sort of information literacy even at that point. There's so much here and it's dense. Our questioners today are not brief. But yeah, so let me see, what else did I add? So Andy Budd says, hey Adrian, long-time listener, first-time caller. Nice, Andy. Just wondering if you've had any awkward interactions with QAnon supporters as a result of sharing your thinking in this area. I mean, that's quite interesting, especially with you having been the subject of conspiracies as well.
Not really, actually. People tweeted at me, and they say, oh, well, you obviously, know what you were talking about. So I've been lucky in that regard, and as far as I actually understand it, I think the QAnon people actually find it really interesting when reporters cover like the movement. I don't think they see it as like threatening or anything. I've listened to a lot of journalists who are on the QAnon beat, and they're not really too worried about their safety, because they're not, I think the people who are worried about their safety are politicians, who are in real physical trouble. The one thing that has happened as a result of all of this is that people are getting in touch with me saying, can we make an ARG that would deprogram, or that would sort of like QAnon people, or that would sort of co-opt QAnon, which I think is a really, I don't know, I don't want anything to do with that. That seems like a really sort of counterproductive thing, because it just, if people think that I'm gonna, well, I think that, again, like we should try to be more transparent in what we do, and I think I don't think you counter disinformation with disinformation. But basically, I don't think that's a good long-term strategy.
Yeah, it's a bit daunting though, at a point where we're literally seeing this play out seriously in the real world in the US elections, which is effectively influences the direction of the whole world. And so one of our questions here as well raised this about so Lord Huff and Puff asked, doesn't the failed election of Trump collapse QAnon? Because unlike many ARGs and conspiracy theories alike, QAnon has a very visible puppet master who has fallen silent post-election.
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole thing about, I think, was it Jim Watkins or whatever, who people sort of now know or have a very good idea of who might have been controlling the Q account, on 8kun or 4chan. It doesn't seem to have made any difference whatsoever, unfortunately. Like, not, I think if you're expecting people to suddenly like snap out of it and say, you know what, like, I take it all back. Like 5G is totally fine, and no one is trying to, infect us. I just don't. Yeah. I would love that to be true. I just don't think that's the case. I think it is a mindset, and I mean, there is a lot of talk about what happens to QAnon now. Like, does it sort of turn into something different? Does it become more? Some people think it might turn into like a religion, a cult. Mm-hmm. Become a bit smaller but more extreme. Some people think it will continue as it is, so we'll see.
Yeah.
Can I I just want to agree with Adrian completely about that, but also add that I think that Biden in particular is a president who will lead to a revival and a boom in things such as QAnon, or maybe if it isn't, it'll be a conspiracy theory. It's different types of communities like that, because like I think Adrian's early point in the talk is relevant, that every time something is disproven, it becomes yet more ammunition for those communities to say, well, and I think Biden represents a return to exactly the kind of electoral American politics and centrism that this community was born to oppose. So I could see, if we had a Bernie Sanders beat Donald Trump, for example, maybe there'd be an argument that QAnon would struggle. But actually, it is precisely the neoliberal electoral politics of the warmongering centrism of American political history that's back in charge. And I think that far right is going to flare up again with things like this in response to it. So I'd say Trump's loss might actually lead to another boom in such thinking.
Yeah, there's a sort of a follow-on question to some of this thinking from Larissa Whitaker. If we're thinking about gamifying education or creating educational ARGs, do you think it's possible to write an ARG that can introduce people to the distinction between causation and correlation?
It's interesting. I just this week finished reading Neil Postman's book, Amusing Ourselves to Death, which will be very familiar with a lot of people in the audience. And he was talking about TV. He was saying TV is awful, and it's sort of like the opposite of a sort of illiterate culture that makes people kind of consider and consume and critique information. And I think he would probably say that I don't know that gamification is like the answer to everything. In fact, I'm kind of like pretty down on gamification in general. I think, trying to help people understand the difference between correlation and causation is something that is super important. And if games are a great way of doing that, then we should use games. But I think that I would kind of almost defer to, teachers and educators on the best way of doing that. Like, I don't know, ARGs are great, but they're entertainment. They're not so much education, in my opinion.
Yeah, she actually follows up with asking whether it would be possible to teach the distinction between research and actual research.
Well, I think that's really, I think that's really interesting. I mean, again, I don't know that you need. I mean, that's what this game, this fake news game or bad news game, they made, and I think there's a lot of if I'm going to be really uncharitable, I think there's a lot of people trying to make websites and guides and friendly YouTube explainers trying to explain these things to people, and they really are preaching to the choir. It's like I'll watch it, I'll play that, and I'll send that to my friends. But I am more skeptical about the uptake from people who are dyed in the wool QAnon adherents. It is not an identity one takes lightly, I think.
I'm also really wondering whether, I mean, this is completely might come across insulting to QAnons or whatever, but it does occur to me to wonder whether they care if it's true, or whether it's just more as long as the forms are satisfying or fun, that it's kind of like a very extended next level make-believe, and and that's part of the quality of it being impossible to disprove some of these things as well.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really important question. And also, I think, like many of these far right leaning communities, this line of irony is really important. Some members probably do to a certain extent believe, whereas others are playing with, we're the joke in some cases, because we believe they believe, and it becomes a sort of ironic form of belief that's there, rather than a. Yeah.
It's about the lulls, not about the truth, as it
precisely,
were.
Yeah.
I mean, there's more meaty questions here. Lord Huff and Puff again. It seems to me as if ARG organic social spread mimics modern propaganda dissemination techniques, or actually more likely modern propaganda is drawing from ARG design methodologies. How do you as a designer reconcile the potential moral hazards involved in pioneering what has become a powerful disinformation tool? What responsibility do designers have now? Do you see a path forward?
I mean, it is possible that, modern disinformation people, practitioners have taken some ideas from ARGs, but I don't want to give ARGs too much credit. I think it's more of kind of family resemblance than the actual direct inspiration. And I say that because ARGs have never really been that popular. I mean, most people here probably haven't played an ARG. Most of my friends haven't played ARGs. I think they use tools in the same way, but it probably would have happened anyway. So I don't know. It doesn't keep me up at night thinking, did I bring about a downfall of Western civilization by helping sort of popularize ARG tools? Because I think it would have happened anyway, and in a way it did. But I do think that it makes it more important to when I made this we made this website for a TV show called Spooks Code 9, which was a spin-off of Spooks, set in the future where London had been blown up by a nuclear bomb. And we made this fake website called Liberty News. And there's this whole conversation with the BBC about will people think this website is real and that London has been blown up by a nuclear bomb. And I was like, well, I don't want to ruin people's fun by putting disclaimers all over the webpage. But I thought it was just such a ridiculous thing to worry about. And now I'm sort of not so sure actually, and now I'm kind of a little bit you know what, maybe they were right actually in being more careful about that. And so I do think that it behooves us a little bit to be careful about how we present our games. and sort of, almost say that it's really not real somehow, so yeah, certainly as the puzzles and the games I've made have been kind of sucked into the QAnon vortex a little bit, it's made me a little bit more wary there.
Yeah, we've got a question from Harmeet Chagar Khan. Where was your question, Harmeet? Why is it some people fall for this QAnon and some don't? Is it personality type, suggestibility, mistrust in the mainstream, social isolation, or something else entirely? What do you think?
I don't know, and I probably shouldn't speculate. But Alfie, do you have anything on that?
Well, I think you made the point in the talk, Adrian, that this is fundamentally connected in some way to distrust in mainstream hegemonic narratives,
yeah.
and there's some legitimate reasons to distrust those things. I think that's one reason why. And also, my comment would just be that we mustn't treat these people as these so-called believers as in any way stupid or sheeple or anything. This is a complicated and intelligent in some ways thing. It can't be explained by it's people aren't to blame for this in this way. It's complicated and really interesting why people go in for these narratives, even if they might seem in themselves ridiculous to us. There are reasons worth thinking about why they work.
Absolutely. I apologize to our online audience in that I've got slightly lost in all the questions.
I was treating it like a subreddit.
Yeah, I know. I think that's
spamming the chat.
I like that a lot. I like the sort of slight memification of the stream over here as well.
That's the best thing about this academia going online for this period. It's brought out all these kind of darker Reddit-y types. It's brought out the 4chan side of us all.
Yeah, we need for the audience to be able to vote up each other's questions here as well, to compete for my questionable attention span in reading them. So yeah, my apologies, guys. Do feed them back in if you feel that there's something that I haven't picked up on as well. So let me see. Gareth Reese asks, given how much effort and energy it takes to refute patently false conspiracy theories, do we risk extending finite resources, countering frivolously constructed false narratives, rather than using our resources more productively and proactively? And how do we resolve the tension between those two priorities, refutation and communication, respectively? In other words, he says, a lie can get around the world before truth has had time to put its trousers on. How do we most effectively counteract the prevalence of disinformation given the effort disparity?
Well, I think there's been a lot of research on this and a lot of commentary, and I think a lot of people say it's not. I mean, someone needs to do the fact checking, and someone needs to refute it. But I don't think that is what is going to change people's minds. There was this whole sort of wave of fact checkers and Snopes and things like that. And again, why would people believe what the fact checker or the sort of response says? Because often it will come from some trusted institution. So I don't know that is, and in a way you sort of dignify it with, I don't know whether you should sort of dignify these things with responses. I think you should focus on things that can improve people's lives. I was listening, I was hearing people talk about, the last thing you want is for politics to sort of turn into just rebutting conspiracy theories. What I think we should all be caring about more is improving people's actual sort of day-to-day lives. Mm-hmm. And I've seen, I've read that the way in which you sort of rebuild trust is by just helping collect the garbage more often. Just doing sort of street level politics, rather than sort of, because what is it that gets people so kind of interested in potential child traffickers on the other side of the planet, of which there's kind of no physical evidence. I think if you can convince people, hey, don't worry about that too much. Let's try and like, reduce the traffic on your streets or improve the schools nearby. Wouldn't you prefer us to focus on that? So I agree. It's really it's really tempting to kind of spend all your time refuting conspiracy theories, but I don't think it's a great use of energy.
I mean, in a way, we're operating quite a difficult marketplace of ideas, though, in a way, because we're it's anything online, even more so now. We're all kind of up against we're in an attention economy, and the child traffickers, however spurious, are, they're grabby in a way that maybe your bins aren't, even as more valid as they might be to your well-being, on a sort of very immediate sort of limbic system, moment to moment. The child traffickers might trump, at least for a second or two, as you go into that. But I don't know. We have a question from Jack Lowe. Do you think those working in immersive forms of storytelling could learn from the focus on believability in ARGs versus the focus on realism that pervades discussions in VR, AAA games, etc.? What are the key lessons they can learn from the perspective of storytelling?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think it's such a the idea of trying to kind of reach photorealism, effectively, or fidelity in video games is kind of really boring, and it's definitely not correlated with any kind of success in terms of commercial success or artistic success. I am really interested in games that try to replicate more spiritual experiences or ritual experiences. I think there is a kind of hunger for that sort of thing. I think that's why we've seen things like astrology, or horoscopes, become more popular recently. And I think that and that's not, people don't believe in, I don't know, people don't follow astrology because they're in some like awesome VR universe. It's a great story, and it makes sense, and it's personalized, and it feels intimate, and it feels actionable. It feels like it's about your life. And I think these are all things these are things that I try and do with our games. Zombies Run sounds silly, but we try and make it really immersive. So when you are playing the game, it feels real, even though it's only just through your ears, And so I think it's really important for game designers, experience designers, to kind of be a bit more, more is not always better, to try and be a bit more imaginative about it.
Lord Huffenpuff says, upstreaming new folks daily via chans, or even things like Breitbart via Gamergate a few years ago, is an opposed organization the only viable path? In brackets, recall Bannon recognizing potential of gamers during his time at Goldman in 2005, leading to hiring Milo Yiannopoulos in 2015, Breitbart daily traffic exceeding election margins in 2016, and so on. What do we think? Opposed organization?
Well, yeah, go on.
No. I think it's too much to answer here, but I'm incredibly interested in how the right was able to do so, and that figures like Steve Bannon, the relationship between the gamer community and the Chan boards and the elections are incredibly important, and why, let's say, the left lags behind so much in recognizing this kind of game energy. Really, it's been one of my main interests, and I've tried to think about it for the last several years. But I think I just love the question, but I can't answer it really in here. What about you, Adrian?
Yeah, I don't know. It's a really tricky one. I think that if you're, I think that we need to do it with grassroots. We need to be transparent. I don't think it's, the Labour Party or the Democratic National Committee or whatever, sort of doing some sort of top-down task force. I think it needs to be something that is open and transparent. And I mean, that is still an organization, right? And it's still a group of people, but it's just a very different way of doing things. And I think we're all struggling with this. Every kind of company or university is just having a really hard time, like figuring out how to communicate in a non-hierarchical kind of non-closed manner. And people sort of want more now. They've kind of seen what the internet can do, and they just don't really like it. If they're sort of told, well, just trust us. And that doesn't. And look, I sort of understand that at the same time, you're saying, well, you can't sort of leave everything up to the crowd. There are such things as experts. But again, that's where a situation where you want to, experts should open themselves up to critique, but not sort of entertain crazy ideas, I suppose.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
All right. Well, we have some conversation, the answers to that question sort of started appearing in the chat as well. It's very pleasingly multi-directional, this conversation. So I'm sorry that it might not be as accessible to Adrian in that. I don't know if you're seeing this. So yeah, Naomi Smith says, seems like an opposed organization would encourage entrenchment and increase the wild speculation on both sides. Rena says, Naomi, lessons would be, what are the values that drives their beliefs, and make real solutions that address those values. Instead of rebutting, think like a psychotherapist and say, oh, so you people really care about this valuable aspect of society. Yeah. Chris Bobeck, right, Lord Hufflepuff. Christopher Wiley recently tweeted he thinks Robert Mercer is behind Parler. Maybe I was the only person who hadn't heard that. Parler, yeah. Are you guys picked up on that? Are you?
Well, I mean, I think that we're going to see more. We're going to see fragmentation of social media, potentially, which maybe should have happened. And I think the thing that worries me about the future is people increasingly living in their own. I mean, people, the idea of a filter bubble has become a little bit parodied at the moment. No one wants to believe they're living in a filter bubble. Right, I don't, even though I follow a certain set of people. But I think that I do worry actually with the increased sort of the way in which people experience the world through digital means, which at the moment is through phones and through screens, and soon will be heads-up displays and virtual reality, means it's going to be more and more possible for people to be manipulated in that way. And Parler is part of that, a small part of that.
I mean, it feels to me as well like a lot of this is, I think some of us are still in this thinking in a way that we should engage sideways with the opposition and engage on subject, whereas actually in many ways it seems like the sort of storytelling is happening in two completely independent streams in different formats and in different mediums as well. And that kind of direct engagement with each other's arguments or even with each other's symbolism seems to be kind of becoming less and less relevant in some ways.
Yeah, what do people have in common? I don't know. People. This sounds really sort of old-fashioned, but one of my best civic experiences was doing jury duty. 10 or 15 years ago. I think that was literally the only time I spent an extended conversation with a pretty good cross section of people in London, who I'm sure I would never have met otherwise, right? And everyone sort of romanticizes jury duty, but there are so few opportunities now that people have, or not even opportunities, so few spaces, civic spaces, where people are encouraged or let alone required to interact with other people in their country, that I think would diffuse these things. You know, like people talk about, oh well, if I could sit down and have a beer with you, then we get on. I don't know that you convince each other, but you would at least realize that the other person is probably not the devil. You know, I mean, that you don't need to agree with everything. You just need to believe the other person is not like literally trying to kill you. Absolutely. And so it is a, and maybe that's because like increased capitalism, like we just don't want to spend any time on people not working, on people not spending, not spending all their time, in the most productive way, quote unquote. But we just need more interaction and more mixing.
I think that's a great point at which to leave it.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys. It was a fantastic talk, Adrian, and great conversation, everybody who joined us online. And thank you so much, Alfie.
Thank you.
Conversation.
And I thought it was so interesting, Adrian. I've taken away loads of things to think about, and it's great to chat and great to meet you. And yeah, thanks for doing it.
Absolutely. So yeah, that concludes the third installment of StoryFutures Presents. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, everybody online. If you want to continue the conversation, I suggest doing so at Twitter, maybe until we get our subreddit for StoryFutures. So yeah, at StoryFutures, #StoryPresents. A recording, as I said earlier, of this talk will be uploaded to YouTube and available via the page, as indeed will all future talks in this series. We might invite Adrian as well to contribute any links that you can think of to the video description as well, if you got the time to do that. So yeah, guys, please, our online audience, please like and follow the channel for update on future talks as well. The next talk on Thursday, the 10th of December, also at 4 p.m. is with creative director of Glastonbury's Shangri-La, and now the In VR Arts Festival Lost Horizon, who will be speaking on immersive festival futures from fields to VR. So I hope to see some of you then as well. Again, thanks so much for today, everybody, and have a great rest of the week.